1 out of 7 people in the United States have some form of chronic kidney disease.
Okay, 1 to 7.
1 in 7, right? So think about the hundreds of millions of people, right, that sit out there today that have no idea they actually have the chronic kidney disease, because the other part of it is 90% of those individuals have not been properly diagnosed or diagnosed at all.
Thanks for tuning in to the Self-Funded with Spencer podcast. Let's go make healthcare better together. So Mark, I appreciate you coming down. We're going to talk Renalogic today, which I'm super excited about. But give, if you will, who are you? What do you do for Renalogic? And then let's get some of your background, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So Mark Masson, I'm the president and chief operating officer of Renalogic. Been in Renalogic for about 7.5 years. From a background perspective, been in healthcare almost 30 at this point. And I would tell you a third of my experience comes from providers delivering care to patients.
Okay.
About a third of it would be managed care services. So anything that supports TPAs and or employers, but be it networks and PBMs and narrow networks and everything else. And then a third in the population health space, which I kind of put Renalogic in.
Well, I always ask this question. Did you intentionally get into healthcare, or did you accidentally get into healthcare like most of us?
So it was definitely an accident. Okay. So when I came out of Baylor, I got hooked up with an occupational medicine company, somebody who graduated from Baylor prior to, and got hired to basically carry a suitcase from door to door and try to get them to utilize the medical center. So that's how I got into,
So you were literally knocking on doors or going into businesses.
I was.
That teaches you how to sell, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Were you good at cold drop-ins and your drop-bys?
I think I was okay. I don't know on a scale from 1 to 10, I would put myself as a 10, but I think I did all right.
Well, it's I had the buddies that started in the world of ADP, and one of my friends would tell me, like right out of college, like selling payroll to small businesses. I mean, you go into buildings and have to avoid security and go through the stairwell and I think he's here, I'll go up here. Yeah. I mean, I imagine trying to sell in that environment, but what I appreciated about it is he was successful in doing that. Is it's a very hard job to be successful, and that's a boiler room almost like environment. So if you succeed there, you can effectively sell anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you knock on some doors and you have some crazy experiences, I could tell you that.
Anybody yell at you or kick you out or anything?
So there was one time I was calling on a junkyard and, knocking on a door and knocking on the fence to try to get someone's attention. That was a little rough. When they opened up the door, as you can imagine, junkyard dogs is a real thing.
I was going to ask,
And they were definitely like, get off my property or I'm going to sick them on you. Okay. So that was quite exciting.
So check that one off the list.
Done.
Not a good prospect.
Done.
Well, so I would love to step forward. Obviously you had a healthcare career that spans 3 decades, as you said. What attracted you to the space? And I do think for the folks that are listening, it'd be very important for us to define kind of the problem as we go as well around dialysis, end-stage renal, the Medicare kind of component of that. Sure. But what attracted you to the idea of working in this space 6 or 7 years ago? Yeah.
So, I mean, I would tell you honestly, this was a corner of the healthcare space that I did not have a full appreciation or knowledge of.
Okay.
So it was just an area that I was a cursory, I understood it and knew it was expensive and a little dysfunctional, but I didn't really know it to the level of degrees. So just the ability to learn about the marketplace, the clinical aspect of this disease was fascinating to me. And then obviously scaling a business that can support obviously the health plans throughout the United States was the good thing. That was the business reason, but really this was more of a thirst for knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I love that, man. And there's been steps in my career that are purely out of curiosity I said yes to, right?
Yeah.
I can think of my most recent stop was in the software startup space for RFP software, right? And I never had a SaaS background. I've never sold software, but it obviously tied in or dovetailed into the world of healthcare. I didn't know what I was doing at first, had no idea how to demo or talk about software.
Yeah.
But I was curious enough and I thought it solved a big enough problem. I said yes to it. And I like those kind of steps in careers. And so I'm glad to hear that that's what you ventured into.
Sure.
The Renalogic kind of history, though, that predated you, some of the origins of when did it start? Was it 20 some odd years ago?
Yeah, so it's probably now 23 years ago going on. So it was a family-run business out of Idaho. It was really built out of network, bill review, cost containment services, and then really grew into more of a renal dialysis company that they wanted to specifically just put their arms around and really attack.
Yeah, do you know why they niched down, if you will, into that space in particular?
I think that they really found that it was really, it was dysfunctional. It was super expensive, continues to be expensive. It was a large expense for small employers throughout the United States. And I think it had the nature of, small company going against big companies.
Yeah.
And so I think that thirst of competition and doing the right thing, both for the members and the plans, just became more of the passion side of it.
Okay.
And then over that time, they developed a really nice legal mechanism to do all the things that we can do today.
Well, so then you probably came in for a phase of growth, right? And you talked about scaling a company before. So then at the point that you entered, what was the business doing, or where were you trying to take it at that point?
Yeah, so what we were trying to do is just mature the product, mature the commercialization, and ultimately get it to an operation that could scale. This was, again, a family-run business. It was very successful. They did a great job. But when you starting to think about going after larger enterprise jumbo employers, you've got to have all of the bells and whistles that go along with it. And you've got to have the compliance side and the security side and the application side. And it just took some time for us to develop that up. And we were really lucky enough to both scale operationally as well as commercially. And, just had an extra amount of growth.
Well, I mean, and to be fair, I would say the name Renalogic is synonymous with this space at this point. I would think you guys are a category leader. Having spent years working alongside healthcare leaders, brokers, and employers, I know how overwhelming healthcare can feel for our customers. We've all been there. Those renewal conversations that never seem to get easier. Rising pharmacy costs and medical costs, and no real transparency into where healthcare dollars are going. That's why I'm excited about Nomi Health. They're not just fixing the old system. They've rebuilt self-funded benefits from the ground up. With Nomi's network, you can offer something truly different. No copays, no deductibles, zero out-of-pocket costs when members see a provider. It's the kind of benefit that makes everyone ask, why hasn't healthcare always worked this way? Ready to bring your clients something different? Visit nomihealth.com and see how Nomi is rebuilding healthcare, one employer and one community at a time. But why don't you tell me, if you will, I think I covered this maybe 3 years ago. It's been a while since I've visited this subject. Mm-hmm. So folks that maybe didn't listen to episode 6 or whatever it was, let's kind of...
They're tuning in now.
They're tuning in now for the first time, new audience. Let's listen to this one.
Yep.
Let's state the problem, state of the union in dialysis or state of the union in end-stage renal. I don't know how big this problem is in terms of frequency. Don't necessarily know the exact dollar amounts that usually accompany dialysis. So why don't we start with some statistics around that?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing is really important is just the nature of how frequent chronic kidney disease is throughout the United States.
Okay.
So 1 out of 7 people in the United States have some form of chronic kidney disease.
Okay, 1 to 7.
1 in 7, right? So think about the hundreds of millions of people, right, that sit out there today that have no idea they actually have the chronic kidney disease, because the other part of it is 90% of those individuals have not been properly diagnosed or diagnosed at all.
Okay.
So this hidden disease factor of the renal disease in and of itself is just a silent, killer out there. And so it doesn't manifest itself early. It doesn't even manifest itself in the middle of the disease state. It really only manifests when your organs start shutting down.
Really?
Or there is some sort of episodic event that forces the kidneys to shut down. So if you think about, the world, people are walking around out there just not knowing to do that. So the irony of it all is this has been going on for tens and tens and tens of years, right? And so you have this elderly population that is basically exploding, not being taken care of. So by the time they're ready to retire or do anything else, they are now moving into Medicare or whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden you have this ballooning of treatments and expense because it just wasn't caught early enough.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Sure.
Why is it so difficult to catch early? I mean, it's one of those things some people might not know they have heart disease until they have the heart attack.
Right.
And hopefully they survive it. But it sounds like it might be a similar situation where it's progressed so far that it's, blunt realization that I have this disease.
Yep.
What's preventing us from catching it way earlier on in the spectrum?
So, I think you have a portion of the population that just don't go to doctors regularly enough.
Sure.
So I think there's just general lack of either access or just want to go see a physician to do a checkup. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is when people do go do their checkups, there's a series of labs that get done, right? It's going to look at your glucose levels and your A1Cs and your cholesterols and everything else that goes along with that. Well, there's also a little test in there called a GFR. And in the GFR is really testing out the health of your kidneys.
Okay.
The issue is that if anybody has seen a lab report that you've gotten, everything kind of goes green, yellow, and red, right? And you're just going through it, and you've got 30 different clinical markers that are happening inside of that. Well, up until they're actually CKD4 or higher, based on a degree.
What's the scale? Is it
it's
up to
1
5?
1 to 5, and then ESRD, which is end-stage renal disease, right? Until they get to a stage 4, it is going to show on that report that it's normal.
Really?
And so the problem is that you have an acceleration point from the middle stage acuity from CKD3 that could cause very much a fast to ESRD or an end stage renal situation straight to dialysis, because it got exacerbated by a surgery that you had sepsis with, a situation in which you got dehydrated and your body and your function started going down, and accelerates all there. And they had no idea that this was there. And then once you're on dialysis, the only way you're coming off is either it retains kidney function, which is great, or you get a transplant.
And how often does retaining kidney function happen, though? It's probably going to be relatively rare.
It's a small percentage. Yeah. So they call it, acute kidney injury or failure. That usually happens when it's just temporary. So I wouldn't say it's so uncommon, but it's certainly not the lion's share of what
and I'm using synonymously and probably incorrectly end-stage renal disease, ESRD, and CKD, chronic kidney disease. What would be the distinction? I know we're both not clinicians, but what's the distinction between those two?
Yeah, so end-stage renal disease is when the kidney can no longer process the blood and the fluids in your body.
Okay.
And that you now need a machine to help clean that blood through dialysis. Okay. And so that's the difference. So you can have chronic kidney disease. You could sit out there and have it for a very, very long time and never go into dialysis.
Because you may be appropriately managing it to some degree?
That's correct. Okay. That's correct. Yeah. So you want to stop or slow the progression of it the best way you can, so it doesn't turn into end-stage renal.
Okay, so let's focus on that category before we get to dialysis. Is let's say we've identified a member with chronic kidney disease, but it's in a stage that we could redirect it or help kind of control if management. What are the type of things that an individual could do in order to manage it and keep it from going into end-stage renal?
Yeah, so the first thing is, again, to get them to the right physician to do the right level of labs and to do an assessment. So the first thing is let's see what's going on with you as a human being. Then it's more about, okay, well, these are the observations that we're going to have. So a good example would be sleep apnea, which certainly causes cardiovascular issues, is an accelerant into the chronic kidney disease stage, because when you have those symptoms, your kidneys are working twice as hard, right, when you're doing that. So maybe one of the interventions is, hey, let's get you, a sleep apnea program. Let's get you the machine that you actually need to know. And then let's also go attack that cardiovascular issue that is certainly accelerating your renal disease state. Yeah. So that would be like an example. The other one is just, you've got an uncontrolled diabetic. Well, you got to get controlled. Yeah. Right? Okay, guys, it's time to get your monitoring. Let's make sure that you have access to the right insulin and the dosages and the equipment, and make sure that they come, back compliant. That's going to help slow the progression of that chronic kidney disease.
Well, so what I'm hearing there too is, one, that's challenging to identify. It is. And two, the fact that it often is accompanied by multiple comorbidities, whether that's obesity, diabetes, some sort of cardiovascular condition. Yep. Like, chances are you have multiple things going on with you as a result, and therefore chronic kidney disease is an added symptom or an added kind of failure, if you will, in your body. Yep. That's a result of all the other things maybe you did unnecessarily. Then that also tells me there's opportunity. So the opportunity to address lifestyle, to address diet, to address exercise, maybe ingestion of alcohol, getting your diabetes under control.
Correct.
There's manageable things that you can do if we've identified that we're on this path.
That's correct.
And is that something that Renalogic as an organization can assist with?
Yes. Okay. So Renalogic has 2 clinical programs. We have a clinical program called Impact Care, and those are for lower acuity, kind of early stage chronic kidney disease members. Okay. There are also the members that are also undiagnosed. So when we go look at eligibility and claims for our healthcare plans, we are mining for information to go find the people that have the hidden or undiagnosed risk or low risk. And those clinicians insert a more of a population health care management strategy, because you have an opportunity to hold the line for them never to progress once they get identified. Now, the undiagnosed ones, to find out where they're actually kind of plotted on the line, that will take some time, because you got to get them to the doctors and the labs to do everything else. But our clinicians throughout the United States work with those members as well as the providers to get the appropriate diagnosis, and then we can put them in the kind of the appropriate.
And then what sort of data are you getting in order to uncover that a person's in that situation?
So we are getting claims data mostly. So what we do is we run a pretty complex algorithm that says, hey, you as a member have had these types of treatments, cares, diagnoses, and then we're able to map all of those things together and be able to identify that with a relatively good degree of accuracy and say, this member with these comorbidity situations, based on what we can see, is most likely a CKD stage 2 member.
Okay.
And if they are, then we get them to the appropriate nurse, and then they start kind of the assessment and interventions.
Now, I may be naive, but is there a CKD scale of 0? Or is it start at a 1?
It starts at a 1.
Okay, like so we all have stage 1 if we don't have it. Okay, that's kind of scary in and of itself. But so you're getting a relatively limited data set, but you've got an algorithm that helps you take contextual information and say this person is probably at X.
Correct.
So is that stage 3, stage 2 where you guys feel you might actually want to intervene? Is there a threshold for you to?
We're going to want to intervene regardless of what stage they're at.
Okay.
If they're at a, obviously a stage 1 or a 0, well, they don't have a problem. We're probably just going to watch them, right? There's no action to need to be taken. And episodically, we'll just make sure that there's not an event that caused a situation that we need to do that. But that team of the care nurses are really looking to hold the line at CKD 3, because there's lots of literature that says if you can catch it before it gets to a 4, you've got a really good shot at them never going to end stage renal disease, because you're holding the line for their kidney health. So that team right there is all about holding the line and making sure that they're slowing or even reversing, because kidneys can be healed.
It can be healed.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
So they're spending time, there. The other clinical program, which is the latent stage CKD members, right? These are the more difficult ones. They're very complex. They've got a multitude of probably health things that are going on, and those nurses are doing different levels of more intensive intervention to stop or slow that progression. And we can hold members there for a while, and we're better than the marketplace today based on the actuarial studies. But in the end, that team is really trying to make sure that, like, hey, if you're on this journey and this is going to happen, we need to make sure that you have an optimal start to dialysis, not starting in the ER, which is a horrible situation to the human, period, the end, or getting them early on and getting on transplant lists.
Well, I'm thinking about, so Peter Attia often talks about like health span, right? And like extending that curve. If I think all of our health follows some sort of bell curve.
Right.
And there's a visual that I can see that I'm sure other people have seen, which is like, how do we extend the back end of that curve as long as possible? Because we're all going to hit a cliff at some point.
Right.
But can we stave that off and slow a disease state progression over years or perhaps decades so the quality of life stays the same? And so people in this stage, I feel like it's an exciting opportunity from a humanistic perspective of what you're able to do. But if you think about plan sponsors, which, a lot of what we do is talking about self-insured employers, plan sponsors.
Sure.
There's also a cost mitigation component to this. Is probably pretty substantial, right?
There is.
So let's start venturing into that world of like, what are we avoiding in cost most likely for a member if we catch them and stop them progressing from, say, a 3 to a 4?
Yeah. So what our data suggests is that it really comes in 3 flavors. So one, we are going to save off ER visits that are unnecessary.
Okay.
Right. So we're just going to have better people utilizing the healthcare ecosystem in a better way and not through the ER. So generally speaking, that's good. The other thing is, because we're working with these members that aren't going to have these big episodic lifts, we're also changing the curve for inpatient stays. So when people have, they walk through the ER and then they have to have their surgery or something's going on, right? You're going to have 3 or 4 days. We're really saving that amount of time and those dollars for the plans. And then the third thing is just better utilization of the physicians. So for example, they may be going to a primary care physician, but they really need to go to a nephrologist, right? So we're trading dollars for dollars, but you're just getting the better care at the specialist level that's more intensive, that's more specific, to their disease states. And then it just saves off a lot of the coordination of care things. Right, that happens. So, I mean, from a kind of from a cost curve perspective, that's where they're going to get the immediate lift. The healthcare sponsors, they're going to get the impact.
Yeah, and then let's just kind of progress into like, hey, now we're in the end-stage renal category where somebody's either indicated for dialysis, is maybe already receiving dialysis treatment. Quantify how expensive that is today in kind of a traditional commercial setting.
So what I would tell you, in a traditional setting with the networks that exist today in the United States, the health plans are going to pay anywhere between 700 and 900% of Medicare, which basically equates to anywhere between $350,000 to $450,000 a year.
Annually,
just for inpatient or just for outpatient dialysis. That doesn't include all the other things that are going on probably with that member at that time, right? Because those members become dehydrated. There's lots more ER utilization, that takes place. So we're working with those members to make sure that they don't do those things, but there's added costs that's on top of just the outpatient dialysis.
Well, so I want to reiterate what you said, 700 to 900% of Medicare, right? And I think I saw a RAND study come out last year that said on average, most plans pay around, I think it was 252% of Medicare across all sort of like locations, facilities. And in some states, we're closer to 300% of Medicare, like California. But you're telling me that on average, commercial payers are paying 7 to 9 times Medicare. Well, how do we get such a delta between what Medicare is paying and what the private sector is paying?
So, unfortunately, in the dialysis world, you really have two companies that control nearly 80% of the market. And so when you have that level of duopoly, right, as size and scale throughout the United States, they are price setters to the networks. They are not price takers because there is no competition relative to their size and scope. And so they're able to, basically, at a negotiation level, say, this is the price in which, we need to, take your, members and patients, and that's it. And you guys can take it or leave it.
Well, so I understand the dynamics of the business side of it. I also understand, there's probably lots of lobbying and policy making to allow that duopoly to thrive. But any average person listening to this and saying 7 to 9 times what Medicare pays seems exorbitant. It's excessive.
It
right?
is excessive.
It's excessive.
It is.
And would you argue that Medicare price point for reimbursement for dialysis is actually at a relatively appropriate level?
I think it is appropriate. And the reason and the rationale that I use this is that if you look at the public financial kind of disclosures that come from companies that are out there today, their treatment rate that they report on is very, very close to the Medicare rates that they get today. And they're obviously making enough money out there for their shareholders at those rates.
Well, see, I wanted to ask that question because sometimes you'll hear people crying afoul that Medicare reimbursement is too low for certain services. And maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But what you're saying that even at that reimbursement rate that's 7 to 9 times below the private sector, still is a profitable level of reimbursement.
It is.
So how do we get to a point where we're justifying or accepting 7 to 9 times that rate? And people are just blindly allowing it in their plan to be paid at that level.
Yeah. I mean, I think, unfortunately, we've got to figure out a better way to empower more health plans and sponsors and brokers to prospectively put in cost containment programs to address the problem. I think the reality is no one should accept it. I think the reality is we need to set up a fair and reasonable marketplace where people make a fair and reasonable profit, right, to sustain, because this is life-sustaining treatment that has to happen. There's no question about that. But we've got to take the profiteering down to a level that is reasonable.
ClaimDoc is a medical claim auditing and member advocacy company. We provide fiduciary services to employer-sponsored benefit plans, and allowing them to create an environment where we ensure that the benefit plans are being charged in a fair and reasonable basis.
My business is basically people, and it become a real simple transition. We thought it was going to be far more complex. I've saved, we'll say, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I could not say enough about ClaimDoc.
Well, yeah, I was guess somebody that's in that position, there's an inelastic need or demand, if you will, for the dialysis treatment. And so therefore, anytime something ventures in the realm of more inelasticity, meaning it's required no matter what, we have got to pay for it. And therefore, maybe we can get away with these like insane reimbursement rates.
Right.
But like anything, I think sunlight is the best disinfectant. We have to sort of talk about it and expose it and regularly say, this is what's going on.
Right.
It's probably happening in your plan unbeknownst to you. But guess what? There's a way to solve for it. And so I want to say, even though your business operates in that margin, you exist because such a big margin exists to try to solve for.
We do.
Let's say Renalogic is now intervening. I run a plan. I have identified a member within my population that is on dialysis, maybe indicated for or just started. What should I expect in terms of an experience as an employer? And then what also should I expect in terms of like change in reimbursement rate if I do that?
So really what we end up doing is we go into the plan design, regardless of who the plan is. And then we are going to make sure that we put the proper language inside those benefit designs to allow a cost containment program to be entered in there.
Okay.
And so we're going to do all that paperwork and all the legalese stuff, with the plan, with the broker, with the TPA, to make sure that we have that language, because we need to have that to support the structure we need to do to implement the program.
Okay.
Right. So
in order to carve it out, you need some amended plan documents.
We need some plan documents, right?
Okay.
And then we need to, work with the corresponding TPA just to make sure that we can see eligibility and claims, so nothing gets through, right?
Okay.
So that's one thing that we've got. That's the second thing we have to do. From an economic standpoint, knowing that it's 700 to 900% of Medicare, we're going to, through a usual and reasonable, basically a methodology of repricing, we're going to bring that down to about 120 to 200% of Medicare.
Okay.
Right. So that difference to the plan, so just in dollar wise, it's going to range anywhere from $80,000 to $180,000 of savings that would not be paid out under a network arrangement versus ours.
So $80,000 to $120,000
a year.
Per year per member, right? That you're able
member.
to redirect.
Correct.
As well. And so how do we redirect it? Because I don't want to be devoid of a discussion around the actual member experience. Because I'm going through dialysis, I'm in a bad state, right? So, I'm fragile. This is probably a life-altering condition where maybe I'm working, maybe I'm not anymore. And so I'm suffering to a degree. And so the notion of making that experience worse probably is unpalatable to most people. So how do you kind of work around that experience to ensure it's not disrupted in any way?
Yeah, so we always say if they are currently treating with that provider and they're happy with that provider, they get to stay there.
Okay.
All we're really going to do is take the claims that are coming through from that provider, and we're going to apply our methodology, and then we're going to adjudicate those claims based on our recommendation.
Okay.
And that's it. The member experience should be the same. Now, are there times in which we are talking to members that are like, I don't want to do dialysis in this facility anymore, and I would really like to explore to do it at home, or we're bringing up the home modality as a better solution? We for sure will do that. And then we will work with the nephrologist or the provider community to try to get that done, because we don't have enough members dialyzing at home when they really should be.
Yeah, and I would say, like, what would be the downsides to doing dialysis? You said dialyzing, is that the verb?
Yeah, that's the verb
form?
Yep.
So what would be the downside to dialyzing at home? Because to me, that sounds great. I don't have to go anywhere. Somebody comes to me. I can sit in the comfort of my home, watch TV or whatever I want to do while it's going on. Why would somebody decide that they don't want to do that?
I mean, I think that from a behavioral standpoint, it probably aligns with more of scary medical situation, right? I'm having to do and use this equipment in my home, and how comfortable am I in doing that? And the technology has gotten so much better, and the training's gotten so much better. So I find it less as an issue in the commercial space, more of an issue as you get really, into the Medicare space, because faculties are different and those types of things. Structurally, the reasons why somebody wouldn't do that is, quite frankly, two reasons. One, they don't have enough storage for the supplies.
Okay.
Right? Because you got to do 30 days at a time to keep everything there, like in the closet.
Is that would be cold storage of any kind, or?
It's both.
Both, okay.
Yep, it's both. Or if you're in a city that you have low water pressure, you need a lot of water to do the dialysis stuff. So if you don't have strong enough water, sometimes that's a limitation. But the home dialysis companies that are in there, they do a home assessment and really make a determination of, hey, what's going on. There's lots of health training for like the caregivers in the home, right, that are able to help them through that process. It's just, and it's also a better experience, right? So instead of, having to go and drive a couple hours to the facility, you're dialyzing 3 or 4 hours, right? And then you just don't feel it like it the next day or the day after, and you don't do a dialysis treatment, your health is you're gonna feel real bad.
Yeah.
And then that's where you get the ER kind of, uses, because they get dehydrated or they don't feel good. And then they end up having to walk in there because they don't have another option.
Is this a daily activity that has to be in, or what's the frequency most of the time?
So for hemodialysis, it's usually it's like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or a Tuesday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday type thing. That's usually what ends up happening. There is peritoneal dialysis, which is every day.
Oh, wow.
So at home, you can do both. There's, machines that do all of those things. So it really depends on kind of who the person is, their disease state, what's they're comfortable. The advantage of doing it every day, a lot of people do it nocturnally. So they do it while they sleep.
Really? So how long would that typical treatment be? A few hours?
It'll range.
Okay.
Yeah,
man.
again. Yeah.
So you're hooked up as something's in your needle in your arm? Or
it's a fistula placement that, requires a little bit of surgery and healing that they use, and that's what they use to...
Well, so there's no bones about it, right? This is obviously an uncomfortable procedure to have to do. So any way that we can make it more comfortable to a person, more accessible to them, is a win, right? In the circumstances that they find themselves.
Yeah. I mean, we want to keep them, once they get there, we want to keep their adherence good, their body healthy. Because really, remember, in the long run, we're trying to get them to a transplant, right?
That's really the ideal outcome. Yeah, is the next step.
We really want to make sure that they sustain, because the mortality rate, once you get on dialysis, depending on the study that you want to read, is anywhere between, 5-7 years. Right? And starts going down pretty well. So if we can use that window of time to keep them as healthy as we can, their organs as healthy as we can, to keep that level of the ability to take an organ on, that's what we want to do, because we don't want organ rejection, right? We got to keep them healthy through this process.
Yeah.
And so if you're non-adherent or, always complicated or always going into the ER, your health is going to deteriorate, and sometimes you no longer qualify for transplant.
Well, so let's say somebody maintains that level of health that they are a transplant candidate, right? They get that transplant, whether it's one or both of their kidneys. What would be expectations of improvement of quality of life if they get to that step? So they're not going to have to do dialysis anymore. Correct? Okay.
That's correct. I mean, they're not having to do dialysis. They're going to feel so much better.
Does that... I mean, again, we're both not clinicians, so I don't want to put you in a bad position, but does that effectively end the end-stage renal disease or the chronic kidney disease?
As long as the organ's healthy and stays healthy. So, I mean, you have organ rejection.
So that is the ideal scenario, assuming we don't have organ rejection or we're unhealthy enough to receive that organ. Ideally, we need them or want them to get to a transplant.
We do.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Really
That's good to know, because I didn't realize that was the ultimate goal. I thought it was maybe a goal, but not perhaps the one that we really would prefer as an outcome. But now it definitely makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
But what happens if somebody's not a candidate, right? There's a period of time that the private payers would bear the cost burden, if you will, of dialysis. And then eventually it's going to move on to Medicare as a primary, correct?
Correct.
So what does that progression look like?
Yeah, so there's regulations on the book. It's the Medicare Secondary Payer Act, which is volumes and volumes of stuff. But the bottom line is what the federal government did in the 70s is basically say, hey, people need access to dialysis, and we as a government need to support that. And this is before all the technology and everything else was happening in the marketplace. And we believe that the government should take over that care, and that shouldn't be the burden on the commercial health plans that are out there. So in the books, they say basically based on modality, you have the commercial plan will pay primary, meaning they're going to pay the rate of whatever those claims are going to be, 30 or 33 months.
Okay.
After that point, and once you become diagnosed with end-stage renal disease, ESRD, you are now qualified for Medicare, assuming you meet the qualifications. Number of hours worked, dollars contributed, immigration, visa statuses can come into play, but you're qualified for Medicare. And once you qualify for Medicare, you can sign up. And the member can sign up. And then once they sign up at that 30 or 33 month timeline, Medicare then becomes the primary payer, and those are going to be at the Medicare rates for those providers. And then they would come off the commercial plan, and the plan would no longer be responsible for those members' claims.
And what distinguishes whether it's 30 or 33 months?
It's the modality. So so it's whether or not they're going to do peritoneal or hemo.
Okay. So then I'm trying to do some math in my head. You said savings could range from $80,000 to $120,000 a year on average for Renalogic. So we're looking at $240,000 to $360,000 average
for the life
of savings for the lifetime of that member, assuming you caught them at the beginning of your dialysis and not midstream.
Sure.
Which that's a significant amount of money. I mean, nobody would scoff at $120,000 of savings a year. And obviously, if you have multiple people in that situation, then you've got that's exponential. And I'm just thinking about like from a risk perspective right now, you know, like being with a captive, but being a stop loss guy by nature. Most of these are going to be spec claims, probably. So that means stop loss carriers care about it.
They do.
Captives care about it, right? And so can you quantify perhaps the scale of the impact to a large organization? If 1 in 7 might have chronic kidney disease, how many people, if I have 1,000 people in a population or 100, what is the frequency that somebody's probably going to be on dialysis within a certain 3 to 5 year range?
Yeah, so statistically speaking, for every 2,500 covered lives, you're going to have one person on dialysis.
So for every 2,500, you have one.
Right.
Okay.
So if I am a plan sponsor and I have 500 covered lives, you are most likely going to have a dialysis patient probably in 4 years.
Okay.
Right? Every 4 years, you're going to have somebody. Now, we've got clients today that had 100 covered lives and they have 2 people on dialysis.
I believe you. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it does happen. But statistically, if you want to kind of trend it out, that's the general nature of the probability.
But I mean, these feel like they've somewhat flown under the radar to a degree, right? Because like in the world of stop loss, we're constantly talking about gene therapy.
Yep.
We're constantly talking about NICU babies or cancer. Just the frequency and the severity of cancer, right, is always near the top of the list of things that get reimbursed by a stop loss carrier.
Yep.
Dialysis is sort of in that middle range to a degree where it's bad, but it's not so severe that it's like constantly being talked about, right? So that means maybe people are not aware of the concerns around this. And this is something that I envision, and I think is really important part of your plan is to have a strategy if and when this is most likely going to arise on your population.
Yeah, correct.
So if I'm fully insured, can I do anything about it?
No.
Okay, right. I always like to have people say that out loud.
No,
right?
You can do the clinical part. You can you can address the hold the line, get them optimally started, do the transplant things. I mean, that's real money, real savings.
Sure.
It's not at a magnitude of $150,000, $180,000, but it's real things that you can do to help stop the trend.
Yeah.
Pareto Health is the largest benefits captive in the United States. With nearly 3,000 captive members, $1.3 billion of stop-loss premium in force, and almost 1 million covered lives, no other benefits captive comes close to Pareto Health's scale. But it's not just about the numbers. Pareto Health is a mission-driven organization, and that mission has 2 distinct parts. Number 1, to make self-insurance simple and more accessible for small to mid-sized employers. And number 2, to arm them with the most powerful cost management tools on the market. So if you're an employer frustrated with your healthcare outcomes, or you're a benefits consultant looking for an alternative to the status quo, it's time to consider Pareto Health. Pareto Health, where employers come to do self-insurance right, to do it easily, and to do it at scale.
Well, so in a couple times you've alluded to the fact that if the TPA and network kind of play ball, right? Every once in a while I'll have a discussion on a show where it feels like the solution like you're providing is an obvious thing to include on a plan if you have the flexibility in order to do so.
Sure.
But there's got to be situations where it's just not possible, right? So what are some of the headwinds, if you will, for Renalogic to be able to step in and intervene and save a plan money?
Yeah, so I think this really has to do with the dynamics of the providers, the dialysis providers, and who owns the networks.
Okay.
And so a lot of time what ends up happening is through the negotiation process, you're going to have one of these providers that basically say, hey, if I'm going to give you this rate, you have to not allow these dialysis carve-out programs or whatever it may be. And that's part of the deal. And so they're stuck, the networks are stuck in a hard place because they need the providers in their network, right? But they also need to deliver value to the health plan sponsors, and they can't allow stop loss to come into play because they don't want those claims to go to stop loss. Like, it's a very high kind of tension environment.
Yeah.
And so what we really have to do is fight through with the brokers to advocate for the plans.
Okay.
Right. I mean, this is about where money should be spent and where money shouldn't be spent. And there's a fiduciary responsibility under ERISA that says, hey, guys, if you know you're overpaying certain things, you have an obligation to do something.
Yeah.
And so to do something, we've got to use the laws and the regulations that are already in place, ERISA and all the other, stuff that's come out lately. And we got to use that power to advocate for the plans. And the plans have to say, at some point, enough is enough.
Yeah, so is there network language then that prevents carve-outs in certain situations? Is that what you're saying? It's like handcuffing the plan sponsor?
I don't think there's network language. I think that there's business agreements, whether or not they're formal or informal, that just says, hey, if you can help me here, I'll help you there.
Yeah, but so I'm a plan sponsor that's taken on the onus of the fiduciary responsibility, and I'm really accepting that responsibility. And I find out I'm overpaying for dialysis because of a network agreement that exists. And whether it's the TPA or the network that's being rented, or maybe it's owned by the same entity, is preventing me from practicing on my fiduciary responsibility.
Correct.
I've got to come to the conclusion that maybe I should not do business with said TPA or said network, right? I mean, that
is a lever.
Okay, that's a lever, right? Because if I don't have enough influence through my consultant, or I'm not a big enough organization to be able to apply pressure to allow that carve out to happen, then I'm probably going to have to move as a result of that. And that's an unfortunate position to be in, because to me it's inarguable to disallow somebody from saving money on their plan when it is literally by law their responsibility to do that.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
Especially if it's voluntary, the member is going to take on that redirect voluntarily. So like, how can you justify paying 3, 4, 5 times as much for no reason?
And this is the quandary. So, the best thing, certainly there's opportunity, and there is plenty of TPAs and network arrangements that allow for this. Right? There's places in which these
we're
plans can
suggesting
go.
if some don't, then we're obviously suggesting some do.
Right. So there are good actors out there doing the right thing for the benefit of the plan and the members and everybody else. So I don't want to. That is absolutely true, and we work with them today.
You wouldn't be in existence if that wasn't
correct.
The case.
Correct. Right. We got to do that. But to your point, I mean, we are at this, time, I think, in just the United States, this combination of fiduciary responsibility, anti-gag clauses, like all the things, the transparency things that are out there. It's like, now I see the data. Well, I got to go take action now on the data because I've now seen the data. Well, if you don't have a partner on the other side that allows you to take action on the data, what are you going to do? Because the last thing you want to do is all of a sudden, with these other kind of member-led, lawsuits, these people are like suing the health plan sponsors, saying you guys aren't spending the money right, and I am, having to dole out more money for these services because, you guys aren't doing what I think you guys need to do, and that's got to play out in the courts the way that it wants to.
And I would say there's always two sides to the story, right? It's not necessarily black and white, and I don't want to paint it as completely binary. But if you're one of those big two, we haven't really named them, but if anybody can do research to know who those big two are, what is their argument for why their reimbursement rates are so high and are justifiable? Do they surely have to every once in a while answer to that, right? I'm not the first person to talk about this on a podcast.
I mean, I think if you think about it, probably more market facing, the answer is, probably from them, which is like, guys, I'm not making enough money with my members on the Medicare side, and I need to make my money up to be a profitable business. Now, these businesses are multi-billion dollars, and they're making plenty of money that's off of it. But I think that's, a line that's been used for a while now.
Which I think would be justifiable if it was 200% of Medicare. If it's 900% of Medicare, then what are we doing? Yeah. I mean, and I think we're reaching a point. You mentioned that a lot of this is in the news, there's lawsuits, but I think we're reaching a point where there's a population understanding of where some of the inefficiencies lie. Like, we all know health insurance costs too much money, right? It's too expensive. People are getting bankrupted. Like, we know that. But now you're able to pinpoint, well, maybe it's those gosh darn middlemen PBMs that are doing things, or maybe it is these duopolies that exist in dialysis. And you're starting to see like, oh, it's over there and it's over there. And you can actually point to the actual problem now.
Right.
And I think that's leaking out beyond just people that are in the know in our industry. General population level understanding is starting to exist. persist. And what happens when that happens? There starts to be a demand politically for some intervention, right? And so what would it look like? And I know you've spent some time, I think, on Capitol Hill. What are some things that, like, legislatively we could do better, or policy-wise we could do better?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I would tell you is, we need to ensure there is fair and equitable policy as it relates to access of care, how dialysis is, the dialysis organizations are evaluated, even up to the point of, mandating some sort of reimbursement schedule. I mean, Medicare does it all the time, right? So there's nothing to say in the commercial market that federal government couldn't come in and say, guys, we're done. This is the rate, be done with it. I think it would take a lot, I think, for the political channels for that to work itself out. But we really want to just make sure that there's good policy that's happening, and it's not going to tilt the hand too far either left or to the right to either more on the provider side or less on the member side. We got to make this kind of balance.
Well, I would say healthcare overspend is definitely in the realm of it's a by sort of partisan situation where most people, I don't care if you're left or right, center or whatever, we're paying too much for healthcare in the United States.
Everybody agrees.
Everybody agrees with that, right? So as an example, policy-wise, what would you love to see, even if it's very small changes? Is there anything like specific that you think we could do tomorrow that could fix some of this?
So, I mean, I think that there's some interventions that could happen. So first and foremost, the fact that we've got a marketplace where it's controlled, 80% of the marketplace is controlled by two different players. We got to bring more competition into that, right? So back in the day, the federal governments, broke up the big bell and made little bells, right? And that competition was designed to create the right marketplace to be more competitive. And if we have more competitive marketplaces, prices, by the very nature, will come down because you're competing, right, for the same members in the area. If you've got two players that are like, you either can go here or here, there is no competition, right? So if we can bring more independent, smaller, regional dialysis players into the marketplace, I would want to do that. How you legislate that, how the DOJ reacts to that, how, any kind of federal lawsuits deal with that, that's yet to come, and it's got a long tail before it happens. But I would love to see more competition. Right, in the
But is there a way without policy changes that we could infuse competition? And not to use a kind of a healthcare term, but could we infuse or inject some competition into it just through the private sector? Like, is that standing up?
I mean, look,
clinics
this is standing up, so this is probably private equity, right? Either in all the stages of growth, truly saying, I'm going to do a, multi-billion-dollar investment, and I'm going to be the next 3, 4, 5, or 6 provider. Or I want to invest in, the land of Dallas, Texas, and I want to make sure there's right competition, and private equity starts building dialysis providers. And more importantly, we should be building providers with the eye of that treatment being at home. Right. We want to, I truly believe that the home environment is healthier, more efficient, certainly less expensive. It's right for the providers. It's right for the patients. If we could get more patients doing that without, kind of the big two, controlling the marketplace, I think that in and of itself will create a market dynamic that that could change the course.
And would this be like kind of a high performance, if you will, network of like direct contracted rates and set rates and or cash equivalent rates? I mean, I talked about this recently just because it's top of mind. We had an entity called EHN on, and they do kind of narrow high performance networks. And it encompasses a lot of different types of services. But like one of the constant like through lines that keeps coming up on the show over and over again, and Nomi brought it up this week on the show, is can we find a fair price for a service that we can point to and prove this is the fair and appropriate rate? The provider will accept it. The plan it's pre-negotiated that it'll be paid at that rate. There's a speed of payment. It's clear. It's transparent. Everybody, every stakeholder in that situation wins. Sounds like the same would hold true in dialysis. We could replicate that model.
Of course. I mean, look, the states have the power to regulate and say, do prices, right? They're already regulating, some emergency rooms can only pay and get reimbursed 200% of Medicare, right? They're already stepping into this world, into the markets. How far reaching you can get and how well they can battle, the money that gets thrown at the lobbying, I think is going to be a situation. I mean, we just saw the same thing happen in Arkansas, right? PBM legislation happened from the governor's office. It got approved. And then you had a swath of people, right, that had differing opinions. And those differing opinions are now causing, like, maybe that regulation is not going to go through anymore.
Yep.
Right. So, like,
that's the challenge of regulation. And I always go back to, I think the private sector, even if we have to do it by one business at a time, or one agency, consulting firm, brokerage, whatever you want to call them, at a time, saying, you know what, we're going to start rolling out Renalogic on every situation that demands it.
Yep.
Let's do that.
Let's do it.
And we might be able to touch a few thousand lives to tens of thousands of lives at a time as a result of the private sector just choosing to do the right thing.
Right.
Same thing with pharmacy. You can partner with a true, transparent, pass-through PBM, focus on lowest net cost today. They exist, and you don't need government intervention in order to solve for some of that, right?
And this is the part of, like, market competition. It should bring innovation and intervention.
Innovation and intervention.
And we can do both. We can do all three things.
Innovation.
Well, we're gonna have to cut that. Anyway, so I mean, I think it just brings a sense of competition, an entitlement of doing the right thing for the right stakeholders at a fair and reasonable profit level. Like, a lot of people can make good money in healthcare, but not profiteer from it.
Yeah, I always have to remind on the show and say it out loud is, like, I'm a capitalist. I don't want anybody to not be able to make money and have a business thrive.
Right.
I mean, that would be anti-capitalist.
Right.
But the reality is we don't really have a free market in healthcare whatsoever, right? So competition allows for the market to dictate what's appropriate and fair reimbursement, knowing that business is still likely a for-profit business and employing people and making money. Like, that's okay.
It's okay.
As long as we all agree that price is appropriate.
It's okay. I mean, look, people need, we have already a system where people have lack of access of care, right? They only have one specialist in a 65-mile, radius, and it's the only cardiovascular surgeon that you can see. Well, we got to bring more, like, staff and more people and more facilities and more players into these marketplaces so people have the right access to care, because everything is just too late in the game. And in dialysis, people are late to the game for all the reasons. And then you just end up with just this ballooning economic situation, both for the plan, for the federal government, for everybody, that just seems to be accepted. Yeah. And I think that status quo acceptance is coming down, to your point. The more data we can see, the more we can really look at where things are being spent, just creates that level of visibility. And now we got to let the market, regulators or whomever it is, to start kind of taking action.
Chronic health issues, surprise out-of-network medical bills, inflated medical and prescription drug prices. These issues cost self-insured employers hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Add to this the rising cost of care and potential for waste across the life of a claim, and it's clear that self-insured employers need innovative solutions that lower their health plan spend. At Valence, we've done just that, developed innovation that shifts the current paradigm. A complete and integrated ecosystem solution driven by data, one that manages and simplifies the complexity of medical claim costs. It is through analyzing millions of data points that we enable employers to realize and fuel cost-saving solutions. Valence experts come prepared from day one, targeting the fraction of claims that will drive the majority of health plan costs. That is how our team lives the Valence promise, engaging early and often for smarter, better, faster healthcare.
Yep. And we need to let our stakeholders also, take action. I implore those TPAs and networks that just sit on the side, that just don't want to do these types of programs, to just think about what's really happening to those healthcare plans. You're putting healthcare plans and companies out of business based on one or two members.
Right.
And that's also not okay.
It's also not okay. Well, so let's do two things to wrap up the show. The first step I want to say is, let's get it down to brass tacks. I'm a consultant listening to this episode right now, really intrigued by the value proposition. I think I have a couple groups that this would be appropriate. What am I looking for? How would I engage Renalogic? And like, what sort of like indications would I bring to you to say, hey, can you tell me if you guys can help?
Yeah. So what we do for anybody in those situations, if you have somebody that we can see a year or two worth of claims information, we're going to tell you what the story is.
Okay.
What's happened, what's coming around the curve, and what you can do about it.
Yep.
And in some cases, let me be really honest, some cases and with some providers and some facilities, there's a fair reimbursement.
Yeah.
And that's the way it should be, right?
Yeah.
There's nonprofits that are out there that I think do a really, really good job. Renalogic cost containment program may not be right. The clinical program might be right.
Okay.
Right? We got a lot of late stage chronic kidney disease members that we want to make sure that don't go to dialysis. That might be the better solution. So getting us the data, just in general, will allow us to create kind of a roadmap for you.
Okay.
As to like where the product mixes are going to make the impact and what the impact is ultimately going to be. At that point, then it's a conversation of, okay, well, what do we want to do about it? And then we set course. And then this is about, looking at the network structure, looking at the plan benefit structure, doing everything that we need to do. And then at that point, it's partnering with the TPA that's associated with it and then getting the program initiated. And look, we have lots and lots of employers that have our program already in the benefit design, and they have not had a dialysis member in 10 years.
Yep.
Right? But there might be one around the corner.
Yeah, it's
right.
waiting and ready, right?
Yeah.
So let's assume it's checked every box, TPA network allow it. You can substantiate savings that obviously justifies your intervention.
Sure.
Then what's the time frame to get the language embedded, the appropriate language? Is that like a 30-day turnaround most of the time? Okay.
Yep.
So we've got perfect scenario, somebody's about to start dialysis. We got the language in place. 30 days later, we're able to reach out to the member. Is Renalogic doing the outreach? Is the TPA doing the outreach to
Renalogic? Our nurses will be working directly with the member as well as the nephrologist, the provider.
Okay. And so then we're determining whether or not it's a site of care redirect, if even necessary, it's just maybe better reimbursement or a home is appropriate.
Yep.
And so you're walking the member up to that point. And now are you guys staying engaged throughout?
Yes.
Maybe a multi-year treatment plan? Okay.
Yeah, we're going to stick with the member. So the one thing that Renalogic does is the nurse in which starts with the member, assuming that the nurses obviously continue to be with us, will be the nurse they'll have forever.
Okay.
Right. So that continuity of care
That's
and
great.
just relationship building and kind of trust is really important with us. So we have members that we've been working with for 4 years. Just in a variety of different forms. And sometimes it's more intensive in the beginning or in the middle or towards the end or, whatever's going on. But we're always trying to make sure we're walking around with the member because their situation's changing too, right? Their life is changing, their situation is changing, their perspective of their health is changing. And so we want to be there, for those members.
That's awesome. And then what happens if maybe midstream, though, somebody changes plans, right?
Yep.
Like I'm sure that happens sometimes.
It does.
So is there a situation where you might actually be cut out even though things are going well, and then all of a sudden they go in like a individual plan on the exchange or change employers and then done?
Yep.
Oh, that's frustrating.
I mean, so if members lose eligibility, meaning that they went to another plan or just decided to go to an exchange or whatever it is, I mean, that is an unfortunate part of a business issue, but it may be the best thing for the member, right? There's lots of things that are good in those environments. What we really make sure that we concentrate on is that if we have a plan that is associated with a certain TPA and they move TPAs, we want to be portable with them.
Yeah.
Right? So because they have, basically underwritten their loss with Renalogic in place.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want to do is move to a TPA and then end up having to pay $200,000 more. And you're turning around going, what happened, right? And so we want to make sure we're portable, and that takes some work and some effort, especially if it's not somebody that we worked with before.
But I don't have to, as a plan sponsor, I don't have to roll out a partnership with Renalogic on anniversary of effective date of renewal, right?
Nope.
So this comes up 7 months into the plan year.
Yep.
You guys can step in at that point, assuming we get the language fixed and everything. Okay. Cool.
Yep, we do a material modification that allows us in the benefit program to say, hey, I've got to make a change because of the financial reasons in which I need to do it. And then we enter in our things, we set an effective rate, and then at that point, then we'll start receiving those claims.
Well, then how do you envision your business needs to evolve? So we can zoom out now and talk big picture healthcare, but Renalogic as a solution set, nothing can stay static, right? Or fixed. So are there other things that you guys are trying to maybe venture into or expand the scope of services? Like, talk to me about kind of future state of Renalogic.
Yeah.
Of what you can share.
Of course. What I can share with you is as this idea of more providers in the market, I think is becoming really important. Renalogic itself is getting up to a place of size and scale where we consistently have pockets of members on dialysis. And if we can figure out to bring a provider in or do something different with the provider community in certain geographic areas, I think we're going to want to do that. Okay. We've historically been agnostic to the provider about how dialysis gets done, but I think we are going to probably need to get closer where we're going to have to care more.
Okay.
Right? We're going to want to vet the provider out. We may want to create, different levels of partnerships, in those appropriate areas for new people to enter in different areas that we think are dysfunctional. Okay. So I think that is probably something that we are going to continue to discuss and plan for. So that would be one of the things. I think the second thing is, I really want us to get better coordinated with the transplant centers. Okay. I think that there's an ability for us to do more and more acceleration. We need to do some more thinking on it. Again, we've been pretty agnostic to it because we've allowed TPAs or networks to kind of dictate where things go. I think we're going to have to step in. I think that there's an opportunity for us to accelerate the time from when somebody is identified needing a transplant and getting one. And I think if we can find 2 or 3 years better, we're going to be better for the plan, better for the patient, better for the member, right? Everything else. So I think we're going to want to spend some more time there.
Well, and I'm just thinking about the provider side. I didn't really ask this question earlier, but it feels relevant, pops up. If I'm a provider that now Renalogic steps in and my reimbursement rate goes down, what's the benefit to me, or do I want that as a provider?
So if you go back to the first question you asked is like, how much money do I need to make to be a profitable business? Okay. We believe a profitable business for dialysis to give great quality of care is anywhere from 200 to 250% of Medicare. Okay. And while that will be more than what we're doing reimbursement today for, it's still the right thing, and it brings that competition back to the market. Okay. So it's finding those providers that can build a business model based on those economics that allows the plan to win and the.
But on the notion of kind of the direct contracting model, does that mean they get reimbursed faster though than if having to go through insurance?
Nope. Okay. Nope. I mean, we'll take out like the pre-certifications and the pre-auth pieces, and we'll try to do the administrative things, which I think still is advantageous.
Yeah, it has some cost. Yeah.
Right. But we're not going to do medical necessity reviews or pre-auth and all that other stuff. Like, we've got to trust our partners to be able to get through the gates. And less administrative means less cost and expense on their side. So they should have a more profitable model.
I've seen staff from anywhere from 7 to 10 times as many administrators as clinicians in most like hospital settings. It's an insane number.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good segue into the last question that I usually ask, which is about your vision, the big picture of healthcare. Healthcare in the United States, we're July of 2025. Like, where do you anticipate in the next couple of years we're going? Big change you expect to see? Demands on improvements, et cetera. What do you think is going to happen?
So I think 2 things. I think one, the recent regulations to allow better transparency and better to the data, we're going to see more of that. Okay. I think we're going to see more penalties when you have bad actors out there. So that will be good as a big picture, because then you can start creating more point solutions or whatever those things are. So I think that will continue. I also think that as the plan sponsors get more sophisticated with their data, they're going to want to do more direct contracting with providers.
Yes.
I think that they're going to step in above the networks and they're going to say, look, I want my own rate with, here in Dallas, Baylor Scott & White, right? Yeah. I want that because I want to hold that regardless of who my TPA is. I want to hold that paper and I want to control what that reimbursement is, and I want to have definition of what that is so it can be transparent, understood, digestible, and forecastable, right? Yeah. I mean, so we need to make sure. So I think that there's going to be more of a movement to more direct provider contracting, and more companies that are out there today. They're popping up all the time. but it's not at the jumbo level because the jumbos can do that. They can get size and scale in the right geographic areas and do their own contracts. For the middle and small marketplace, this is where I think if they had a vehicle to get that done, I think they would experience some really good outcomes.
I've long since said this on the show, but what you're saying kind of triggers the thought is that I do think there's a erosion of the necessity of your traditional insurance networks in 2025 and beyond. I do think whether it's putting a reference-based pricing model front and center or narrow high-performance network models front and center,
Right.
carve-outs for certain disease states, et cetera, the network might end up becoming a secondary backstop to a degree, but I don't know that at this point you can argue that the network as a product has as much value as it's been sold the last couple of decades, especially when we know these insane levels of reimbursement rates are being allowed within those contracts. You start to question, well, what is this network anymore and value-wise, especially if there's 96, 98% overlap in providers within these PPO networks. Right. And there's vast disparities between the reimbursement rates. I'm like, what am I getting?
Yeah.
And they don't give me access to my data sometimes. You don't tell me why the reimbursement levels are what they are. It's proprietary. Why am I doing business with you?
What am I doing?
Yeah.
And I think the networks are in a hard, let me be straight, the networks are in a tough spot, right? With the consolidation of the providers, right? You got less players that are inside of it. You're dealing with a lot of the price taking, price setting, situations, and that is just what it is. But I do think that there is an avenue, what I would like to see as secondary for plan sponsors to try to contact providers. I would want providers to start contacting employers. Right? Which is saying, hey guys, based on our data, I just want to let you guys know, you spend almost $500,000 with us. We would like to grow that business. How do we get more of your members to utilize us if we are able to do some sort of economic and, agreement, partnership, right? And that hasn't really happened that either, right? That bi-directional, the providers reaching out. And I think we're going to come to the crossroads. I don't know if it's going to be, this year or next year, but I think the reality is something has to break. Meaning that we've got to get better cooperation and partnerships from the provider and the employer community. And I don't know what that's going to take hold of. And I think it'll probably be geographic in some degrees. But, I think we're getting to a tipping point where, people are going to have to align a lot better than being in a network vacuum.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so now, Mark, you get the fun, maybe unenviable task of giving us your closing thoughts, right? Yep. So as we sum up the hour or so that we've talked, and we usually have about a third or so people stick around all the way through, which is pretty cool.
That's cool.
So you're talking to somebody.
All right. Hello, those somebodies.
Yeah. So whether it's a closing idea or a call to action, what do you want to leave the audience with to think about?
Yeah. So the only thing what I would like you guys to leave with is chronic kidney disease is complex. It's hidden. It is sometimes unpredictable. What I would ask you guys is to proactively put some sort of renal disease program in there, be it clinical or cost containment, and leave it on the side. If it's not used, it's not used, but make sure you have a vehicle and a point solution if and when the time is needed. So be proactive. Just because you don't have pain today does not mean you're not going to have pain tomorrow.
Yep.
Awesome.
That's it. It's a great way to close it, Mark. I appreciate you again making the trip down, and thanks for obviously being a partner of the Pareto ecosystem as well. But I appreciate you very much, man, and I hope we get to do this again sometime
likewise.
soon. All right,
likewise.
Cool, man.